Hey everyone, it's Joshua with Denton North Church, and I've got
Grant,
who you also hopefully know and recognize. We've got an interesting sort of bonus conversation for you today. These end up happening randomly when Grant and I have too much time on our hands, but this is something really cool, an area of specifically addressing porn addiction and unwanted sexual behaviors and habits. And Grant and a few others have been just aware and reading and listening to some really just cool resources and stuff that I've been hearing about secondhand and been wanting to actually engage with more myself as well. And so we got this opportunity to interview one of the people that Grant's been spending a lot of time reading his stuff and listening to him. And what we really hope this conversation will provide is if you're in a place of just stagnation or hopelessness or just of lacking resources, we kind of thought this would be a helpful way to at least get that going again. It doesn't answer every question, doesn't address every issue, but we just wanted to do something that might be a blessing to our community. And I'll let Grant kind of speak more to who we're actually talking to and what this conversation is going to be about.
Yeah, so this is Drew Boa. He has kind of a ministry group thing called Husband Material, and it's something that I and a few other people from our church have been going through. And it's really just kind of changed the game for me on all this stuff. It's introduced me to a completely different posture and approach to the whole thing that's been far more fruitful and healing than what I had before, just kind of from the default, whatever I inherited. So yeah, Drew, I kind of want to just kick it over to you right away and say you wrote a new book called Outgrow Porn. It's had a really positive impact on my life. And just, I guess at the highest level, just like, what is the subject of the book? What is this conversation about for someone that is not familiar with it?
The book is about finding lasting freedom from porn, which I did not experience for a long time. 10 years ago, I had a year without porn, which was a really big deal for me. And then I relapsed over and over and felt like I was all the way back at the beginning and realized that porn still had power over me. No matter how far away I got from the behavior of it, there were still deep-seated fantasies that I didn't understand that were always the focus of my porn searches. And until I really understood that and started to deal with what was underneath that, I was still fighting a battle against myself. And so my heart is to help other people get to a point where you don't have to fight a constant battle against yourself, and you can get freedom that actually feels good and can be sustainable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think maybe a good way to frame it is to get into the book. I have a Post-it note over the cover of mine because it's a kind of like aggressively provocative cover.
Yeah.
It says Outgrow Porn real big and has a giant pacifier on it. And even though my wife is like familiar with that metaphor and what you mean by it, her first response was, I hate that.
Okay.
Because it was just like, she was like, something about the way it's mixing together like childhood things with sexual things or whatever. And I think that's kind of what you're going for. Well, so do you want to explain the book cover?
Yeah. The book has a giant pacifier on it. And what is a pacifier? It's a fake nipple. It's meant to soothe a child. And for many of us, that is how our relationship with porn began. It's not primarily men and women who get hooked on pornography. It's boys and girls from really young ages. And so while the pacifier image could be seen as humiliating or too bold, my intention behind it is to validate that this started so young for many of us. It's something we carried with us into adulthood. And so porn is on one hand, it's a pacifier, a childhood coping mechanism. And on the other hand, it's also a predator. that exploits us. Just like porn often exploits its performers behind the scenes, it also exploits consumers. Um, and so so to have this image of a pacifier is saying, hey, this didn't start with you. It's not all your fault. Just like we wouldn't blame a child for being sexually abused. Um, I don't think we should blame children for seeking out porn that searched for them first.
Mm-hmm. Another thing on the cover is it says, finding lasting freedom without fighting an exhausting battle, which to someone might sound like, well, if it's not an exhausting battle, then it must be a quick fix, which starts to sound like snake oil.
Mm-hmm.
But you're not advertising a quick fix, but how would you characterize it if it's not an exhausting battle?
Instead of battling your sexuality, which is the predominant evangelical purity narrative of like fight for purity, I'm advocating for a different approach, which is not a quick fix. It's not easy. It's befriending your sexuality. In other words, getting to know what's underneath the urge to watch porn, what's underneath sexual thoughts and feelings. Oftentimes, when we ask that question, we discover a lot. Childhood experiences, unprocessed emotions, and oftentimes some of the most vulnerable, deepest parts of us. And we don't need to fight those emotions. We don't need to avoid those childhood experiences. We need to face them. We need to feel them so we can heal them. And that's a very different approach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I guess one of the things I wanted to ask you about is just some questions that pertain to our church in particular and kind of our context. So I'll give you some of that context. We're typical in many ways in that about half of our men report that they struggle with porn and masturbation. And women do report that as well, but to a lesser extent. About half the people who struggle with porn and masturbation feel hopeless or discouraged about it. And we've made heavy use of accountability partners and software and willpower, and usually with disappointing results. And confessing sexual sin has been normalized. But too often you're confessing to someone who is struggling just as much as you and isn't able to like help you,
Mm-hmm.
Make progress down that road.
Been there.
Yeah. Yeah. And many seem to feel that an endless cycle of acting out and confessing is kind of the best we can do. And so we do keep it in the light to a certain extent. And there's been some healing in just being able to talk about it. But we don't yet have a good track record of helping people heal and change in a deep, lasting way. So that's like some of the context in our church. And I guess the first question I have about that is how can we destigmatize and normalize healing without normalizing unwanted sexual behaviors as like an acceptable status quo?
That is a great question. I don't have a perfect answer for you. I know that vulnerability from leadership creates safety. And there's a fine line of being vulnerable without saying, and it's okay. So what I find helps people open up and be willing to go deep and read a book like Outgrow Porn and start a deeper healing process often comes with hearing the story of someone who is actively in that process. Not arrived, not finished, not polished, and also like not who they used to be at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Having someone model that is huge. That's what I see in a small group context. That's what I see in a bigger leadership context. Like you need someone who's willing to put themselves out there.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think, most of the people who are struggling with this at some deep level know that it's not okay. We usually don't need to be convinced of that. So maybe things are changing with Gen Z and Gen Alpha and some of the younger generations that are much more comfortable with porn or less uncomfortable with it. But in general, I think the work is not to try to convince people that porn is harmful. I think the work is to try to release people from shame.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think what has stood out to me, and maybe I could have said something earlier about this for those listening. I'm not nearly as familiar with your work and your methods and your approach, but I've been introduced to it through Grant and a few other guys in our church who have been reading your stuff or listening to your stuff, and it's been one of those things where I've been like, oh, it's on my list. I want to go listen to more of that, or I want to go do my own deep dive instead of it just being secondhand. But I think what you just said there is really true of our church and maybe many other folks, but is not needing to be convinced that this is bad and not great for us, but needing to be convinced that there can be meaningful change and freedom from it. It does seem pretty common for a lot of folks who've been in the exhausting battle of it for maybe a decade or more to essentially have this feeling that this is going to always be with me in a way that that will never really change. And they're just not convinced that lasting change can happen. And I think even seeing a subtitle like that on your book is what's cool about that is it might be like, okay, we'll see, I'll read this. We'll see if this author here has something to offer. But it does seem like that's a lot of the challenge on the pastoral context, talking to people, is trying to convince them of that there is a different approach.
Yeah.
And that's what I've noticed the most about just hearing secondhand from Grant and others, is that your approach does seem very different than what I've heard of and what the average, I guess, just Christian person struggling with porn and unwanted sexual behaviors has really heard of or experienced.
Yeah. And most people who are trying to quit porn are doing some version of accountability software or porn filters, or going to a group where I'm confessing each week, or maybe even getting professional counseling. But even then, in all of these contexts, porn is usually treated as the problem. When if you start to look at it like a pacifier, it's a way of dealing with pain. Porn is really a sexualized solution. And if you want to outgrow it, ultimately you need to see, well, what's the real problem? And then, can I find better solutions? Better solutions to satisfy the deeper desires underneath the surface level sexual symptoms. And if you think about a kid who had a pacifier growing up, eventually they just drop it. Eventually, they don't have a pacifier accountability group necessarily, but they grow and mature to the point that they don't need it anymore. That's what I've experienced. That's the hope. It's not that you'll somehow be porn proof for life, but it just doesn't have the same power anymore as we grow up. So maybe that's another way of framing this, to where we want to normalize healing without normalizing that it's okay, is to say, this is about maturity. It's about growing up into a sexually, emotionally, spiritual adult.
Yeah, what you just said there was one of the major paradigm shifts for me. That was really helpful and it was hard to believe or accept at first, because I was like, I don't feel sad or lonely or anything like that. I feel horny. And someone trying to tell me that I'm anything but horny is a little hard to believe, because it's it's just kind of blinding.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess for someone who maybe is like skeptical that there could actually be more to it than that, maybe an example of like a deeper desire that was hiding behind the sexualization.
Totally. Oftentimes we find clues to what's underneath sexual urges in the specific content or the specific stimuli that's providing a sexual appeal. In other words, the power of porn is in the particularity. It's in the specific type of people, the specific activities that are going on. The sexual scenario that you might seek out is different for each person. And if we start to not necessarily look at that, but look into that and talk about that, then we can find out, oh, this is what the real need is. So my sexual fantasies always focused on girls and women with braces. That was the strange yet seductive, magical thing that I would always fixate on. And if you start to really have these deeper conversations, you find that people have all kinds of specific things that have sexual power over them. So, interesting. If I'm feeling the urge to go watch porn that's focused on that, well, how does that make me feel? Or what would that do for me? I've identified that underneath that arousal and excitement is this sense of that it would give me some kind of acceptance, that I would feel powerful if I could have an experience like what I might be fantasizing about. So we take that and say, okay, acceptance and power. That's what I'm being drawn to. Well, what's the opposite of that? Feeling rejection, feeling powerless. Could it be that part of why I might be drawn to this thing is because in my life, in the present, and maybe in the past, that I'm really feeling rejected and powerless. Now we're on to something.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody is drawn to porn that symbolizes connection for them, maybe it's group sex, and there's a sense of connection in a group. Well, when have I felt disconnected from a group? If I'm searching out mother-oriented porn or father-oriented porn, well, maybe there's a story behind that. Every trigger tells a story. And there are pain triggers, like being bored, lonely, anxious. And then there are pleasure triggers, like a specific type of person that is not just attractive, but seems irresistible. And a big part of becoming self-aware and realizing, oh, it's not just about sex. It's not just about being horny, is figuring out what triggers you and why.
Mm-hmm. Something that I think prevented me from making any of those observations for a long time was just feeling like the subject matter is so just like eminently dangerous that like the only safe, even kind of safe move is to run the opposite direction as fast as possible. And so the idea of saying like, well, why don't you be with it or give it some of your attention in a way that's not trying to stoke sexual desire. It just sounded almost impossible at first. Like, so what would you say to someone who is wondering about that?
First of all, if you're in a risky environment where you might sexually act out or you're feeling a lot of temptation, whether it's an online environment or in person, get out of there. Take that short-term survival strategy of avoiding it in the moment. That's totally fine. And then eventually at some point you have to face it. Eventually at some point you have to process it. You have to sit with it. You have to be with it. Otherwise, what happens is when we resist a strong emotion or a strong sexual urge, it actually intensifies. it's like a snowball that gets bigger and bigger and eventually gets out of control. And it might be hours later or days later, but those sexual thoughts and feelings will catch up with you if you don't process them, if you don't talk about them with a friend, if you don't look into what's really going on. And I've experienced that. I mean, what may have been a mid-level temptation, if left unprocessed, it becomes like a train going faster and faster eventually. And that's when we start to feel hopeless, because it's like, this is just overwhelming. This is stronger than me. This is bigger than me. I can't resist it. And at some level that's true, because when we resist it, it gets stronger. But when we can actually like allow it to speak to us in a way, or like show us what we truly need, it can dissipate. You can move through it instead of against it. So short-term strategies are great short-term. But if you want lasting freedom, which is what we're talking about, then in a safe environment, you got to find people and a process that helps you go deeper.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you kind of walking through it like that calls into question the idea that running the opposite direction actually is a safer bet.
Yeah. I mean, let me give you an example. I live in Colorado Springs, where we have wonderful hiking trails. And one of the most popular trails consistently attracts very attractive people. So I'm on this hiking trail. If I see someone who I find to be very attractive, in the past, what I would have done is just like, first of all, freak out internally. And my stomach would get tight, and I would just be like looking down at the trail out of a sense of fear, being threatened by this person, both kind of wanting to look and also being afraid to look, and being afraid of where my mind might go. And ultimately, it's not really kind to myself or to the other person. What I've learned to do in becoming more sexually and emotionally mature is to simply breathe, notice those feelings and thoughts, maybe say hi to the person, maybe say a quick prayer for them, acknowledge how I'm feeling or what I'm seeing, just to myself, and then moving through it. And if I'm not able to do that, it means that I've got some unprocessed stuff that needs to be unpacked at some point.
One of the things that you've already touched on that we don't need to ask in quite the same way that we had prepared, but I thought I might say for our listeners' sake is, your methods, the things you've been touching on already, of encouraging people to revisit their sexual habits and kind of look underneath them, revisit some histories and some of what Grant's told me about the dialoguing with one's younger self kind of stuff, analyzing emotions, analyzing habits, and the particular material they're drawn to. For many people, that's just like so unfamiliar territory, and those methods, sound difficult and maybe even overwhelming, and could even seem almost like too much fuss, whereas just adding in a blocker, putting some, limits on your devices is easy in that way, right? So I think what you're saying, what you've already been talking about, is that addresses those folks. I wanted to say that because I could see folks listening to this and getting just, dipping a toe in the water of some of your material and other material like it, and feeling a little bit of that feeling of, that sounds like a lot of work and a lot of fuss and a lot of extra effort. But what it sounds like you are already talking about and answering that question, if someone's wondering that, is that this is the long-term route. This is a long-term solution toward freedom. And the other things that are easier, that are blocks, that are, filters or whatever, are short-term. Mm-hmm. They may help you run from something, but that they don't, and most of us could report this in our own experience. Those little things don't ultimately lead toward a lasting change and getting closer toward freedom. And so if anyone's listening to this and feeling that way, I wanted to name that really quickly, that that's a thing you've just addressed already in the first few minutes of this conversation.
Well, thanks. And yeah, what we're talking about is not easy, but it's a different kind of work. And there's a lot of hope in it. I mean,
Yeah.
part of why it's hard to even consider something new is so many of us feel like we've tried everything. So choosing hope is brave. And I think even for someone listening to this podcast is taking a redemptive risk. So thank you for staying with us.
Yeah, you also, I think, modeled for me that the journey of this can be rewarding and exciting in some ways, and like create a lot of connection and just be very meaningful and sweet at times, and like intimacy with God and with other people.
Yeah.
And that was not at all what I felt like I was getting into before.
Yeah. I mean, the typical porn recovery techniques often feel like deprivation. Like I'm giving up something. Whereas when you figure out what your desires are, like I talked about acceptance, I now am able to experience that more fully than I ever could through a sexual fantasy in real relationships with God, with other people, within myself, with my inner child, who I call little Drew. I've got more acceptance than I ever had before. So this is not deprivation. This is delight, ultimately. And it's not just about avoiding what's bad, it's about receiving what's good.
Yeah, that's good.
So yeah, some of our folks who struggle with unwanted sexual behaviors are themselves, parents of young children, and that just adds an extra level, extra stakes, concern, just a desire to heal and change, so that they can pass that on, induct their children into a more healthy view of sexuality, and break this just repeating generational thing that can happen. So what's the most crucial thing or potent thing you could say to parents that are approaching your material, and something that could help them begin and bear fruit over the years?
And this topic is worth its own interview. Here are some of the most important priorities. Number one, do your own work. Like, get your own healing in this area as a parent that you can then pass on to your kids. My parents carried so much shame about their sexual stories that they never talked about sex or sexuality at all with me. And they thought they were protecting me from mistakes that they made by not talking about it. What they really did was deprive me of learning. And it also became this forbidden area of life that took on secret magical power rather than just a normal thing. And so when you do your own work through your shame, process your sexual story, like get freedom if you have a struggle in this area, like that's huge, because you'll be able to have more empathy and authority as you address these issues with your kids. And then secondly, normalize it. I think sex talks should happen as soon as kids can talk. And it could be as simple as just learning the proper names for body parts from a very young age. And then from a sexual development perspective, having healthy, safe touch, being willing to answer any question, and blessing body parts, blessing sexuality, and also having boundaries around it. Books like Good Pictures, Bad Pictures and Good Pictures, Bad Pictures Junior can be helpful. I have a card game that I play with my kids. It's called Having the Talks. It's got 107 questions that are conversation starters. Many of them are focused on sexuality, like what's the difference between boys and girls, or what places on your body you do grow hair, what kind of person do you want to marry one day, and they're starting these conversations for my kids at age 4 and 8, and it's just making it normal. Like my kids ask me to play this card game because it's fun for them, and I'm not lecturing, I'm asking them the question. Like, for example, how do you think your body will change when you get older? Like, and then they'll tell me, and sometimes they get it right, and sometimes we have to correct something, but it's fun, it's joyful. That's the kind of relationship you want to have with your kids around sexuality, where it's okay to talk about it. Maybe it's even fun, rather than this serious, somber, single, 100-minute conversation. Instead, you can make it 101-minute conversations.
Man, those are already super helpful. I hadn't heard of either of those resources you mentioned, the card game, the books you mentioned. My wife and I, we have 3 boys, and 5, 3, and 20 months. And my 5-year-old, he's in that stage where he's asking questions like this, or just making comments that are interesting.
Yeah.
He'll talk about like, why do you have hair on your legs, Dad? And I'm like, just happens. And he's like, well, I don't want to have hair on my legs when I'm grown up. It's just kind of funny. Like, there is a humor to it, but there's also a lot of like me thinking, it would be nice to know how to take these conversations that start so naturally like that, that start, so spontaneously, and know how to build something and go in an intentional direction with that.
Yes.
But I really don't, have much.
Well, yeah, those resources I mentioned are great. thesextalk.com is great. When we don't normalize sexual conversations, and when we don't provide support and guidance from a young age, kids internalize 3 things. 1 is fear. It's like, well, I can't talk about it, or else. 2 is shame. They think I must be bad if I'm interested in this, or if I have a sexual experience. And then the last one is just disconnection, because this ends up being isolated and lonely instead of community. And so that combination of fear, shame, and disconnection is a perfect setup for sexual addiction, especially when kids are encountering porn at an earlier and earlier age. On the other hand, having more courage, confidence, and like community in this area, that's a great formula for freedom. And we can give the next generation something better than what we got.
That's good. That's helpful. And I think it also just makes most of us realize something, like just while you're talking, that if I don't do anything different, don't look for resources, and don't try to think of a better way to do this, we often just default to what our parents did for us.
Yeah.
Or we try to do something different without any real intention there. It's like, I'll just do the opposite of what they did, or things I didn't like, without really imagining what best is, So I think I immediately was thinking that I need to spend more time and energy and effort in that direction.
And oftentimes porn and other sexual influences will fill in the gaps and become the primary sexual educator if parents don't step up to that job.
Yeah, that's good.
Do you think we could get into book specific questions, or is there anything here?
I think we probably should. Yeah.
Okay. I kind of want to go out of order.
Do it.
So Drew, there's a chapter in your book called The Science of Regulation. And you did a really good job of like introducing some key terminology and making it as simple as it can be and not overwhelming, and keeping it to like 2 pages of the scientific part. And I wanted to share an experience and ask you, like, how does the science of regulation map onto this and help me handle it?
Great.
And so an experience I have often is it's usually in the afternoon, and I'm trying to like work or do something, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, I am shutting down. Like I need to just go lay down for a power nap and then get back to work because this is not working. And so I lay down, and some part of me starts asking the question like, what times have we been aroused recently? Maybe we could start fixating on that and thinking about it. And so I'm like, man, I'm trying to lay down to sleep, and now I'm having to like fight this battle or whatever. And so I think that has something to do with what you were explaining in that chapter.
Yeah.
And so could you map that onto this and then explain how having the scientific knowledge could give me practical tools?
Yeah, absolutely. So to make it super simple, our brains are trying really hard to help us survive and to do that efficiently. So many of us are familiar with the survival responses or trauma reactions of fight, flight, and freeze. But there's another one that's lesser known that we experience all the time called flop. And it's essentially the opposite survival reaction. Instead of powering up, we shut down. Instead of stressing out, we numb out. Instead of like frantically trying to solve a problem, we just give up. And it's our brain's way of conserving energy, sometimes playing dead, sometimes like riding out the storm until it passes. And so after a day of maybe working really hard, maybe you have a lot of kind of that fight, power up energy going through your body. Eventually, that survival response, which is, as we said earlier, a short-term strategy, eventually it runs out. Eventually it's like, I need a break. I need to rest. But our brains don't naturally just go back down to like a normal level of functioning. It's they if we really push ourselves, it will go all the way out down to flop, shut down. And I don't think it's necessarily wrong to flop. I think there's a time and a place for that. But it sounds to me like it's like that's what you were experiencing. Like you were in that place of like total exhaustion, which often precedes a relapse. I think that out of the different survival responses, almost always before sexually acting out, we'll go through some level of flop. Some level of this life is too much. I give up. I give in. And in the moment of being so depleted that you're like a turtle going into its shell, or like a computer that or a phone that's just out of batteries, can't function anymore. Naturally, your brain doesn't want to stay there. That's still not a comfortable place to be. And so while it may have down regulated you out of work to collapse, that's still not rest, really. So it may also want to upregulate you with something exciting, something arousing. Sometimes the survival responses want us to calm down. Sometimes they want us to wake up. And so sexual behavior in a sexual experience, like an orgasm, has this profound combination of being stimulating and soothing at the same time. So when you feel dead, it makes you feel alive. And also, when you feel too stimulated, it provides some level of relaxation. It's a very powerful regulator. But it often takes us to extremes. So it'll take you to the highest height, and then it'll take you to the lowest low. And then you feel like I can't stay on there, so I need a higher height again. And that's how one relapse can build on another. Is this making sense?
Yeah, it reminds me of like a thermostat trying to keep something
Yes.
in a comfortable middle.
Exactly. And so addiction is essentially like a broken thermostat. It means that I'm going from like putting on all my winter clothes to taking everything off. That was not meant to be an innuendo, but so a huge part of learning to repair our thermostat is finding ways to regulate without porn or without whatever the addictive behavior is. Whether that's going for a walk outside, looking at the sky, breathing the fresh air, calling a friend, being honest and open, being seen and heard. It could be prayer, journaling, reading the Bible, if that is regulating for you. For some people, that stresses them out even more. You have to find a way to bring your brain and body back into balance. And that's not easy. When you've learned how to do it over and over again using this one thing, that is very predictable. The pacifier of porn gives a very predictable result. And I think that's part of why it's so appealing, because it's a level of certainty. Even if I know I'm going to feel shame afterward, I know I'm going to feel shame afterward. Versus if I call a friend, I don't know if he's going to answer. I don't know if I'm going to feel loved. I don't even know if that's really going to help, but I might relapse again afterward. Like when we choose connection, there is always going to be risk involved. And when we choose to disconnect through porn or some other activity, we know what we're going to get. It's familiar. And so understanding all the science of regulation, it can be very de-shaming. It can be very validating, because instead of just thinking, oh, I'm so sinful, or I'm just such a pervert right now, I can reframe that and say, I'm really dysregulated right now. I'm feeling really triggered. I'm in fight or flight, or I'm in flop. Question is not like, what's wrong with me? It's, where am I? And where do I want to be?
That's super helpful. And I feel like those other regulators, several of those you mentioned, I feel like they're so achievable. They're so at hand. Maybe you can't always call a friend right then in the moment, but the going on a walk, going outside, something like that. And I think in some contexts, recommending that to someone without some of the background you gave about regulation and triggers and why porn is so appealing in that way, it could almost seem, if I was just to recommend that to someone without having any background, it sounds kind of like a, what would you call it? Almost like distract yourself kind of thing. Instead of really leaning into that science of, this is a different way. You're an emotional being, and these are the things that have been going on. And this way you're needing to regulate and stabilize out. And other things are better at that than what you're turning toward. Yeah. And I do think we have a sense of that porn is one of those unhealthy things, as well as just reaching for our phones and scrolling on stuff. And I think people are becoming aware to the fact that we are reaching for easy to grab, unhealthy options for this. And porn is one of those, which hopefully I think can help people be convinced of this, instead of go distract yourself and call a friend. It's like, hey, this is a way better way to ground yourself and talk through something.
And I think any activity could be used to avoid what we're really feeling. So when you go for a walk or when you call a friend, the important thing is to be present. And when I go for a walk, I'm going to take some deep breaths. I'm going to notice the color of the sunset and take that in and reflect on what's really coming up for me right now. What do I really need right now? And that's different from like going outside and holding my breath and hoping that the feelings will go away. But there are lots of different things about what I just said that can be very helpful. For example, when you're walking, you're moving your legs. That bilateral stimulation is actually part of what is the mechanism behind certain types of trauma therapy. It could be healing. It can let energy out. Being in nature allows us to have a soft focus rather than the hyperfixation that we have on a screen when it's a very particular kind of attention that we have when I'm working or when I'm searching for something online versus just being in nature, for example, or even in just a scenic place. Like there's a softness to the gaze. There's a different kind of stimulation that we were created for.
I guess to bring it back to my scenario, partly because like this is something I've been trying to figure out, and partly because it's like a helpful example. So the way that you've talked about like an inner child or internal family systems rings true for this, because it feels like most of me is like, what would really help me now is if I could just sleep for like 15 minutes and take the edge off of this tiredness and then get back. But then there's some part of me that's like, hey, I have a better idea and I'm really insisting on it. And it's that we go do this instead.
Yeah.
And so maybe if I had a different past, it would be easier for me to just take a nap. So maybe the move for now is like, well, maybe I'll go for a walk instead. I don't know. What do you think?
We were talking about it from more of the sense of like what's happening in my brain biologically in that moment. But if we look at it through the lens of parts, there's a part of you that wants to take a nap. And then there's this part of you that wants to think back to those arousing memories. And then maybe there's a part of you that's criticizing yourself for one of these things. And one of the hopes that I have with my book is that when those types of experiences happen, that we can see the good in each of those parts. Right? The part that wants to rest is trying to help, and that's great. The part that wants to think about those arousing memories is also trying to help. And maybe it learned how to do that from a young age. And like maybe the inner critic or the part that might be shoulding in those moments is also has positive intentions. I realize that might sound radical. It might sound like, wait, isn't some of this like a sin? To think about going back to porn or like, what about parts of us that want to do bad things? Well, the emotions are not bad. The urges are not bad. What we do with them can be good or bad. But there's a lot to be said for just simply welcoming those thoughts and feelings, allowing them to exist, and not letting them take over at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
That makes me think of just, and I'm sure this is something you talk about quite a bit. This is me being, green to a lot of your material, which I do plan to read, by the way. I got my, you and I were emailing about this. I got my ebook situation figured out.
Good.
Which was great. But what you just said reminds me of even just the first sin that we have recorded in the Bible is not that the thought was, what's the worst thing I could do, and what's the way I could go against God's wishes the hardest just to make him mad. It was actually this being deceived into thinking this is a good thing. This is good for you. This will be better for you. And that any part of us that is arguing for and trying to convince us into a sinful activity is not thinking, yeah, let's do the worst thing we can think of. It really is more this part of us that's trying to help and thinks it's protecting us, or thinks. Yeah. I'm sure a lot of your exploration of that helps make that case better. But that parts of us thing that you just said was really helpful for me, and I hadn't really thought about it that way.
I'm glad to hear that. One way to also think about it is that it's not the mature, rational, logical adult me that wants to go back to porn. It's a much younger part of me. It's the boy within me, or the teenager within me. In those moments when the urges and attractions and the pull of porn feels really strong, it's like that boy is showing up. And so rather than try to get rid of him or fight him or avoid him or ignore him, it's like, I want to come close to that boy and get to know him better. And just like you would do with your own children, connect and then redirect. It's like, my kid wants something that's bad for them, rather than just shutting that down, which probably would make them want it even more. Like, I want to find out like what's really going on with curiosity and compassion, and then gently, lovingly redirect towards something better.
That's good. I've heard several different ways of putting that into words for parenting, but the idea of using that same thing with our younger self, just would not have occurred to me.
It's really helpful. And you know what? There are times when I might not be able to do that for myself. Or there are times when I need Jesus to do that for me. Or there are times when I need a brother to be with me so I can borrow his brain because I'm so dysregulated. But that is the work.
Mm-hmm. Something I've appreciated about your approach is that you are kind of constantly sponging up different things and seeing how they fit and being very thoughtful and bringing together like theological and pastoral concerns with. Why are you laughing?
I'm laughing because while I'm trying to integrate Christian spirituality and psychology and neuroscience and trauma research, there are people who don't like it. I'm laughing because I feel validated and appreciated and just being seen by your comment that I'm trying to bring all these things together. But it's really easy for us to look at it through just one lens, through just the lens of clinical psychology, or through just the lens of theology, and this is a spiritual thing. Or maybe looking at it just through the lens of biology. But like, our sexuality affects every part of life. Every part of life affects our sexuality. So I do feel that it's important to take a holistic approach, to think about it relationally, to think about it like with many different factors involved, and to learn from a lot of the techniques out there, even if I don't always agree with their worldview.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And it's like it's a big interdisciplinary task. And so whenever I've come to you with questions about like, what would you say to someone who's concerned about this or whatever, you've always had a lot of willingness to reevaluate and question and kind of show how you've thought through that and why you are where you are. What I was wanting to ask is, like, if you were to successfully persuade the church to implement your paradigm, what do you think are some of the potential unintended consequences or potholes that even after all this work you've put in it, maybe you still kind of wonder about them a little bit? Like, could this get oversimplified or exaggerated into this or lead to this? And especially as the next generation of leaders and lay people may lose some of the nuance and thoughtfulness. Kind of like how we look back at purity culture and say, like, we can see where this came from. We understand what they were trying to help with. But now in hindsight, like, what do you fear that hindsight might reveal about your approach, I guess?
Man, that's a great question. That's a vulnerable question for me. To be critiquing myself. You know, I think my approach could be more Christ-centered. I intentionally downplayed the Christian spirituality at the heart of my book because I didn't want to turn away people who have spiritual trauma or for whom that would be a stumbling block. But I mean, yeah, the centrality of Jesus in this whole thing is huge for me, yet something that I didn't emphasize in the book. I treated Jesus more as like a resource to draw upon rather than, the most important thing of all. So I think that could be a critique of my work. Also, I'm hearing wonderful stories from guys who are finding healing in unexpected places that don't fit with their theology or don't fit with what they thought freedom should look like. And yet, like, they've been changed. They've had miraculous experiences. And if I said what they were, people probably would think, oh, I don't want to try that, or that sounds dangerous to me. And there are things I didn't talk about in the book, but maybe 10 or 20 years from now, we might think, we used to think it was wild back then, but now it's standard. And then, if we really go back to the basics, like, I didn't say this in the book because, again, I didn't want to turn people away, but I would not be surprised if eventually this whole field swings back to the importance of things like diet, exercise, and sleep. Because all of those things affect our energy. They affect our mood, our emotions. And porn is a way of coping with unprocessed emotions. It's a way of altering your mood. It's a way of trying to regulate when you don't have enough energy. So I didn't emphasize those kinds of things because I think for some people it brings up a lot of shame of like, oh yeah, I know I should be eating differently, or I know I should be exercising or sleeping more. But those things really do have a big impact on many areas of life, including how we feel sexually and how much power addictive behavior might have.
This is kind of a random question, not from our perspective. Our church has been, this semester, we're kind of diving into fasting in our small groups. And something that's come up, someone said, like a pastor said, that if someone is struggling with like a addictive type behavior, especially if it's sexual in nature, he's pretty quick to recommend fasting. Has that been on your radar? Is that something you've ever thought about?
Yeah. It's not really part of my personal story, so I don't really go into it much, but there is a wonderful resource called Dopamine Nation. It's a book by Dr. Anna Lemke from Stanford, and she recommends dopamine fasting, which in other words is not just food, but fasting from like different types of regulators or sources of stimulation, especially the digital drugs that we are all taking every day. And kind of resetting the dopamine levels in your brain. And I think that's great. About to publish an interview on it. And yeah, I mean, people have talked about that a lot. You know, they take a month off of Facebook and notice all these positive side effects. And so I think for some people, like their journey to freedom from porn might involve digital dopamine fasting that could include getting a dumb phone or a wise phone or a light phone that still allows them to navigate life in the modern world without having like sexually seductive images and videos being thrown at them or just being available. So yeah, but I think even fasting from food, I mean, obviously that's a great biblical practice. I think a big part of it though is why. Why am I doing it? What's my intention behind it? With any of these surface level strategies like diet, sleep, and exercise or fasting, it's like, okay, what is my reason for doing this? And is it rooted in shame or is it rooted in love? Because if it's shame-based performance, that's going to fuel the cycle of addiction. It's going to be one more purge getting ready for the next binge. But if it's a way of loving myself as God loves me or receiving what he has for me, like that's a very different posture. You know, like I'm fasting from food so that I can be filled up even more.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a healthier version than like, I'm going to punish myself for being such a sinner, which is actually something I've heard like from a recovery group of college guys. They said, okay, every time one of us masturbates, we're going to fast from food for 24 hours. And that just incentivized secrecy in the group.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And so like, it depends on why we're doing it. And hopefully whatever surface level strategies we might be doing are also coupled with deeper things. And that's why what I emphasized in the book was the deeper things, like studying your story, facing your fantasies, healing your heart, because that's what was missing for me in order to really, really feel like you know, I don't need porn anymore.
Mm-hmm. Well, we know that you have a heart out here in just a couple of minutes. I feel like we could talk for much longer. Many more questions could come up, and I think that will happen too as I enter into your book and think of other things. But would you be willing to close our time together, just praying for folks, you know, especially in our church that will be hearing this, and in our community of churches, beginning to sort of reawaken a desire to not fight the battle, but go along this journey and try out some of these new methods, and in general just have some hope in their sin struggles.
Yeah. Let's pray. God, we know that you're here with us. Help us become aware of your presence. Thank you for being with us in our emotions, in our sexual thoughts and feelings, and for loving us here exactly as we are. You created our sexuality as so good, and evil has vandalized it. You are the restoration artist. Come and restore us to your love and kindness. Holy Spirit, convict every person listening to this of what their next step toward health might be. And surround us with support from our brothers and sisters in Christ. Amen.
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 Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us.
I'm sorry, my kid just came in.
No problem.
That is
Hi, kid.
so okay. That is exactly what would have happened if we recorded my house. So
Okay. Anyways, I love this. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for talking, Drew. We appreciate it so much. Thank you. Bless you and your family.
Bye. Thanks again.